Yes. Okay, so thank you all for being here today. It's my pleasure to welcome Nunzia Lauriello. She's a postdoc at Polytechnic di Torino. And today she's going to talk about dissipative particle dynamics as a computational tool for rheological modeling of structured fluids. So please, Nancy, go ahead and start sharing your screen.
Yeah.
You should be able to.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. I'm going to share the screen. So now you should be
looking at your, yeah, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you able to see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. Let me take a couple of minutes to introduce myself and my background before starting with the presentation. My name is Nunzia. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Politecnico di Torino, where I work in the MulmoPro group. I've recently completed my PhD in chemical engineering at Politecnico di Torino. My academic journey at Politecnico di Torino started with a bachelor's degree in chemical and food engineering, and then continued with a chemical and sustainable process engineering master degree. Then I joined the MulmoPro group during my master thesis, and I worked on the use of dissipative particle dynamics as computational tool for simple and structured fluids rheology. Then I explored even more in detail this topic during my PhD. In addition, during my PhD, I had the opportunity to spend a few months at the Institute of Chemical Process and Fundamentals at the Czech Academy of Science, where I worked on the use of dissipative particle dynamics to compute transport properties. And then at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, where I worked on the integration of machine learning techniques with coarse-grained modeling simulation technique for polymer systems. Well, let's start with the presentation. Today, I will talk about the use of dissipative particle dynamics as computational tool for rheological modeling of structured fluids. A little bit of applicative context of the research project. Complex fluids and structured fluids are very common in chemical engineering. They include polymer melts and solutions and numerous multi-phase systems such as gels, colloidal suspensions, and emulsions. They share the common feature of being able to form different microstructures that influence macroscopic rheological properties. Rheological properties, in turn, play a crucial role in the definition of their possible applications. This is certainly true in the case of food and personal care products, where, for example, the rheological properties of ketchup, ice cream, shampoo, or toothpaste can determine the success or failure of the product, but at the same time, rheological properties influence the processability of the materials and are essential in the design and scale-up roles of processes and equipments involved, especially in operations such as mixing, dosing, transfer, and filling. Among structured fluids, we focused on pleuronics. Pleuronics are amphiphilic three-block polymers composed by two lateral hydrophilic chains of polyethylene oxide and a central hydrophobic chain of polypropylene oxide. Pleuronic macromolecules can be precisely tailored by controlling some macromolecule characteristics such as the hydrophilic-hydrophobic composition ratio to meet the specific requirements of different applications. They are very interesting as drug delivery systems. Pleuronics are grouped into the pleuronic grid, where the letter indicates the physical state of the system and the number, the composition and molecular weight. Depending on temperature, concentration, and applied shear stress, they behave in completely different ways from a morphological and rheological point of view. Here is reported the phase diagram of pleuronic L64 in water. At very low concentration and temperature, L64 macromolecules in water behave as unimers. Above certain value of concentration and temperature, pleuronic macromolecules self-assemble into micelles, and further increasing the concentration and temperature, different mesophases are formed, such as the lamellar one. Depending on the underlying microstructures, the rheological behavior ranges from Newtonian to non-Newtonian, such as shear thinning in the case of worm-like micelles and viscoelasticity in the case of complex structures, and again Newtonian. This peculiar microstructure rheology interplay mimics what happens in many other systems common in chemical engineering and make these systems ideal testing ground for developing methodologies that can be extended to other systems. Computational modeling is a valuable tool for rational design and performance optimization of such systems. Pluronic macromolecules can be precisely tailored to form specific microstructures that impact on material properties. Material properties guide the design and scale-up of processes and determine the performance in a given application. This loop involves very different time and length scale. This is a multi-scale problem, but a challenge is modeling the morphology effects on material properties. At the largest scale of interest, computational fluid dynamics is able to predict flow field in industrial scale equipment for the estimation of important macroscopic quantities such as pressure drop or power input that are crucial for process design and optimization. But CFD lacks microstructural details, and rheological properties are input information of a CFD simulation. On the other hand, fully atomistic molecular dynamics simulations are not suitable for the description of such fluids. So the description of such fluids require a mesoscale technique. There is the need to bridge the gap between the micro and macro scale. Dissipative particle dynamics fills the gap since it achieves the mesoscale, which is the relevant scale to capture the formation of microstructures, their evolution, and their impact on macroscopic rheological properties. The main reason for this is that DPD is a coarse-grained model. Groups of atoms and molecules are treated as single entities, so-called beads, reducing the number of particles involved in the simulation. Through the mapping and coarse-graining procedure, a pluronic macromolecules become a shorter chain of beads, where the gray one represents 4.3 repetitive units of ethylene oxide, the black one 3.3 repetitive units of propylene oxide, and the green one, water molecules. In DPD, beads interact through conservative, dissipative, and random forces. The conservative force is a purely repulsive force and a soft force, so it allows bead compenetration as interparticle distance goes to 0. The repulsive parameters Aij quantify the maximum repulsion experienced by beads in the system. The soft nature of the repulsive parameters allows the employment of larger time-step size that speeds up the simulation. These parameters need to be defined for all the interactions in the system and describe different solubilities of the species involved in the system. Another conservative contribution comes from the harmonic potential that the model bonds within the chain through the bead spring model. The degrees of freedom removed through the coarse graining procedure are reintroduced in the system through pairwise dissipative and random forces that describe, respectively, the viscous drag and thermal noise in the system and are related each other through the fluctuation dissipation theorem, where gamma is the intensity of the dissipative force and sigma is the intensity of the thermal noise. These two parameters are linked to each other to ensure that the DPD acts as a thermostat, the DPD thermostat. DPD is a very flexible tool to capture the rheological and morphological behavior of different systems. So far, we focused on polymer self-assembly, but there are a lot of works in literature dealing with colloids, surfactants, and so on. DPD is capable to capture the structural rheology relationship and to quickly mimic different conditions, different concentration, temperature, and composition. Rheological properties can be computed in DPD by applying both equilibrium methods and non-equilibrium methods. Equilibrium methods are really important in the case of self-assembling systems since they allow the calculation of the zero shear viscosity without altering microstructures. And this is an important step to support experiments in the formulation design, but is a very important preliminary step before studying the effect of morphological changes under fluid motion or temperature changes. But at the same time, non-equilibrium methods allow a more complete characterization from the rheological point of view of the fluids by studying the effect of shear on structures and flow behavior. As anticipated, viscosity can be computed in DPD by applying equilibrium methods and non-equilibrium methods. In the first case, all quantities are measured when the system has reached its thermodynamic equilibrium. One single simulation is required with no special modifications to the simulation setup to compute all the desired transport properties. The viscosity is computed without altering equilibrium microstructures. The most commonly used techniques in this case are the Green-Kubo method and the Einstein-Helfand method. On the other hand, non-equilibrium methods are characterized by a perturbation to the system. The particles are constantly perturbed by an applied external field. There is need for intricate and specific simulation setup for investigated transport properties, and equilibrium microstructures are altered in this case. In the case of standard non-equilibrium methods, such as the Lis-Edwards approach, a velocity gradient is imposed to the system and then the viscosity is computed by measuring the momentum flux. The Muller-Plate methods act in a reverse way, reverse non-equilibrium molecular dynamics technique, where the viscosity is computed by measuring the velocity gradient after imposing a momentum flux to the systems. Let's see in more detail each of these techniques, starting from the Green-Kubo method. The Green-Kubo method can be employed in self-assembled systems without altering their equilibrium microstructures. The Green-Kubo method allows to calculate the zero shear viscosity by integrating the stress autocorrelation function. The stress autocorrelation function is a function that describes how stress tensor elements are correlated each other over time. The behavior of the decorrelation reveals the fluid viscosity. The main drawback of this approach is linked to large fluctuations of stress tensor element which increasing the dissipative coefficient, so moving towards high mid-number fluids, leading to poor accuracy in resulting viscosity. To handle with this issue, in one of our first works, we proposed a procedure based on the calculation of progressive cumulative contributions over time of the integral to viscosity. The viscosity is then computed as the average value oscillating around the theoretical asymptotic value. This procedure allows the evaluation of the viscosity and associated uncertainty. This procedure was successfully validated against benchmark methods. The Muller-Plate method is a reverse non-equilibrium method. A steady-state shear flow is generated in the system by imposing a momentum flux. How it works? The system is divided into a finite number of layers in the z directions, beads. Then a bead with the largest momentum in the x direction is chosen from the top layer, as well as a bead with the smallest momentum is selected from the middle layers, and the momentum of both layers and then swapped. Then the viscosity is computed by measuring the velocity gradient in the system. The momentum flux is evaluated from the total momentum transferred in the system over time. The main advantage of this technique is the quick convergence of the velocity profile and the possibility to control the intensity of the momentum flux. This method is limited to Newtonian fluids. The Lis-Edwards approach acts in a reverse way. In a standard way, a velocity gradient is imposed to the system. It is imposed in a way that is known as the sliding brig approach. The periodic images above and below the simulation box, that is the yellow one, are displaced. They are counter-moved in opposite direction with same velocity, and a linear velocity profile is generated in the middle of the box. Then the viscosity is computed by measuring the stress. The main advantage of this method is that it is less computational costly with higher statistical accuracy than equilibrium technique. But this technique is limited by the fact that there is a limited range of shear rates that can be applied to the system. And in this way, it is not suitable for the simulation of very low shear rates and in the case of zero shear viscosity. To investigate viscoelastic properties, there is the possibility to apply an oscillatory shear technique. A sinusoidal strain is imposed in the system. A viscoelastic sample has a stress response that oscillates with the same frequency of the strain, but with a phase shift that ranges from 0 in the case of purely elastic fluid to half pi in the case of purely viscous fluid. Well, today I will talk about two different applications involving two different types of pluronics, L64 and F68. They have both the same hydrophobic block but different hydrophilic chains. F68 have very longer hydrophilic chains, respect with L64. These two systems behave in a completely different way from a morphological and rheological point of view. In the first case, we studied the evolution of microstructures and zero shear viscosity with respect to concentration in the micellar range. In the second case, we studied the evolution of microstructures and rheological properties at fixed concentration, but with respect to temperature. Let's start from the first application, and in particular let's start from the DPD model of the binary mixture of L64 in water. A L64 macromolecule, through the mapping and coarse graining procedure, becomes a shorter chain of 15 beads, where the blue and red ones represent, respectively, the repetitive units of ethylene oxide and propylene oxide at the mesoscale. They are surrounded by water beads. The repulsive parameters need to describe different solubilities of species involved and are usually mapped on Floriagin's parameters that describe different solubilities of the species involved. Beads within the chain are connected through the bead spring model, and the parameters of the harmonic potential are responsible for chain flexibility in the system. The coarse graining procedure allows to gain computational speed, but at the same time, a lot of atomistical details are sacrificed. So let's keep in mind that the main challenge is to match physical properties retaining essential features. Which physical properties? First of all, we want to reproduce the phase diagram of the system, structural properties of L64 in water. So we validated our model against the phase diagram, and we are able to reproduce the formation of the micellar phase at 5% of polymer concentration, as well as the formation of the lamellar phase at 75% of polymer concentration. Let's take a moment to appreciate the formation of the lamellar phase. But as anticipated, our focus in this work is the rheology. So we want not only to reproduce the phase diagram, but also the zero shear viscosity experimental trend with respect to concentration. This type of prediction has immediate application in assessing the quality of the final product, but at the same time is also an intermediate result in a multi-scale framework where rheological properties are output of DPD simulation, but at the same time input properties of a CFD simulation. So there are several methodological issues to pay attention to achieve this goal with DPD and to unlock the applicability of DPD to structured fluids rheology. First of all, the standard DPD method fails the prediction of realistic transport properties. It intrinsically describes gas-like dynamics, and we want to describe a liquid-like dynamics. Our system is a liquid-like system, a water-based solution of L64. So we want to improve the model to switch gas-like dynamics into liquid-like dynamics. This is the first goal. Then we want to develop a methodology to compute viscosity, relying on inequilibrium methods, and eventually we want to work on the parametrization of a real system, starting from liquid water to a binary mixture of water and L64 to capture our physical target, which is the experimental trend of the zero shear viscosity. Let's start from the first point, which is the improvement of the model to capture liquid-like dynamics. In the standard DPD model, dissipative force and random force act only in the direction of the bit-bit separation distance. This model intrinsically describes gas-like dynamics. The prediction of equilibrium properties is correct, but the prediction of transport properties is wrong. We extended the model, adding shear dissipation in the model to capture liquid-like dynamics that, together with the proper calibration of model parameters, allow us to predict correctly transport properties. Once defined the model, we worked on the development of an automated routine for an equilibrium approach to compute viscosity. As anticipated, the Green-Kubo method allows us to calculate the viscosity by integrating the stress autocorrelation function. The accuracy of the viscosity strictly depends on the quality of the stress autocorrelation function statistics. The stress autocorrelation function calculation depends on some parameters that determine the calculation of all the decorrelation and are the sampling interval, the simulation time, and the time step size. The optimal values of this parameter depend on the viscosity, but the viscosity is an output property of this simulation. So there is need for an automated protocol. There is need for long time for good statistics, but how long is long enough? There is need for an automated computational protocol, and this was our motivation in the development of an algorithm able to compute viscosity with controlled precision and to evaluate on fly the optimal values of these parameters. The code is described in a publication that we did in 2023 and is available online on GitHub. The algorithm is made of 3 loops, an outer master loop and 2 inner loops. The first loop increments the value of the sampling interval to capture all the decorrelation behavior of the stress autocorrelation function and until the convergence of the cumulative viscosity integral to a constant value is verified. The second inner loop increments the value of the simulation time until the effect of stress autocorrelation function tail fluctuation don't affect anymore the coefficient of variation of the viscosity. The outer loop, the delta T loop, reduces the time step size until the viscosity can be considered independent from the time step size. Once defined the model and the method to compute transport properties, we studied the effect of some model parameters on transport properties. In order to address the parametrization issue, we want to identify model parameters to capture our physical target, which is the zero shear viscosity, and we started from the first component of the mixture, which is water. So we studied water-like fluids, and in particular, we carried out a multiparametric study, and we studied the dependency of the Schmidt number on these three microscale parameters. We grouped the effect of these three microscale parameters that are linked to the dissipative force in the effective friction coefficient, which describe the overall friction that beads experience in the system, and we found out two relationships that allows us to compute to simulate a fluid with a specific Schmidt number, and in particular, a fluid with a Schmidt number of water. And we want to simulate liquid water transport properties at room temperature. Our first work was limited to one temperature, in this case 25 degrees Celsius. Then we extended this work to other temperatures. I did this work in collaboration with Professor Martin Liesel during my stay in Prague, and in this case, we developed a top-down parameterization methodology to account for temperature effects in both conservative and non-conservative interactions to fit temperature-dependent transport properties. In this way, we are able to simulate liquid water at different temperatures, predicting correctly transport properties, and in particular, the Schmidt number over the whole liquid temperature range. I will just show here the discrepancy that we obtain for viscosity, diffusivity, and Schmidt number between experimental values and simulated values without the modification of the model and the work that we did, and the match that we can obtain in the case of temperature-dependent extended DPD model. Well, at this point, we are able to simulate a solvent, the water, in a proper way from the point of view of local thermodynamics and transport properties, and we tested two different approaches to model L64 interaction in the system. In the first approach, we applied the same parameter for all dissipative interactions and all concentrations in the system. In this way, we obtained an underestimation of viscosity, as we can see from the discrepancy between green points and the experimental black curve. In the second case, we applied concentration-dependent and interaction-specific dissipative parameters related each other by this relationship, and in this case, we can see a match between the experimental black curve and the computed viscosity. Red points. Again, we validated the model against the phase diagram. We are able to see the transition from micellar phase, gel-like phase, lamellar phase as expected. Well, let's move to the second application, in this case F68 in water. Why this system is interesting to study? Experimental data tells us that F68 in water shows liquid to solid transition around 35 degrees Celsius. The experimental work was carried out by a research group from Federico II University. This behavior, along with biocompatibility, makes this system interesting to study as drug carrier. To obtain a controlled release, it's important to control morphology and rheology of the carrier. So we perform DPD simulation at different temperature. At 5 degrees Celsius, we are able to see the formation of a disordered domain as expected, and the strain stress curves are typical of a purely viscous fluid, where the elastic component is almost zero as expected. Increasing the temperature to 35 degrees Celsius, we can see the formation of an ordered domain as expected, and the strain stress curves are typical of a viscoelastic fluid, where the elastic component becomes different from zero. We also performed morphological measurements to understand the microstructural mechanisms underlying elasticity through a post-processing automated routine able to calculate some structural features such as the average aggregation number, the gyration tensor, shape description, and so on. We want to answer to the question, what does elasticity depend on? Two key factors to detect are the formation of an ordered domain, and the formation of pure chains interpenetration that can happen due to the formation of bigger micelles or the formation of more micelles. Simulations help us providing further details on the number of aggregates and aggregation number over temperature with respect to experiments. And in particular, from simulation, we can say that there are submicelles and micelles with different aggregation number in the system. And at very low temperature, at 5 degrees Celsius, we are below the critical micellar concentration as demonstrated by the absence of a peak in the system. Further increasing the temperature to 28 degrees Celsius, we can see that we are above the critical micellar concentration as demonstrated by the peak. At this stage, the system is composed by submicelles and micelles with a range of size. Aggregates are free to fluctuate in the system, promoting the formation of disordered domain that results in a macroscopic, purely viscous rheological behavior. Further increasing the concentration at 35 degrees Celsius, some micelles basically disappear. At this stage, the system is composed by micelles with almost uniform size. At this stage, micelles are very close to each other. They are not free to fluctuate anymore in the system, but they are still around their equilibrium position, promoting the formation of an ordered domain, resulting in a viscoelastic rheological behavior. We also measured the micelle radius, the PPO core radius, and the pure shell thickness, relying on both simulation and experiments. Experiments, black holes, tell us that the micelle radius stay nearly constant as temperature increase. The PPO core radius slightly increase as temperature increase, and as results, the pure shell thickness slightly decreases as temperature increase. On the contrary, simulations tell us that the micelle radius slightly increase as temperature increase, the PPO core radius slightly increase and then stay nearly constant as temperature increase, and as a result, the pure shell thickness slightly increases as temperature increase, demonstrating the expansion of the pure shell thickness. This result, together with the presence of closer micelles, explain the formation of pure chain interpenetration. This simulation evidence is essential to explain the observed rheological behavior, and in particular, the emergence of a solid-like behavior. Simulations agree with experiments also in the prediction of the complex modulus step from very low temperature, where the system form a disordered domain, to a high temperature, where the system form an ordered domain. To conclude, we can say that the DPD is in general a powerful technique in capturing the interplay between microstructures and resulting macroscopic rheological behavior. And this work paves the way to the simulation of other multi-phase systems, such as emulsions. Now we are working on different aspects related to this topic, such as the improvement of coarse graining techniques to realistically simulate the behavior of soft matter systems. We are working to the integration of these techniques with machine learning techniques. And from the point of view of application, we are focusing on the application of such systems as drug delivery systems. With this, I've concluded my presentation. I would thank you for your kind attention, and I hope you found this interesting.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So does anybody have any question from the audience? Otherwise, as always, I would have to break the ice. Okay, well, I guess I'll break the ice. Otherwise,
Okay.
please do just unmute yourself and ask some questions, or rather in the chat if you prefer. Well, let's start from the end because you
Okay.
did show a lot of results, and and the main it's clear for somebody that is not used to use DPD that it seems to be an extremely how do you say a very you can use DPD for a lot of different systems, and it's can have very wide applications. So can you show the slide with conclusions and future
Yeah, sure.
that the one, thanks, and future steps. So for example, what do you mean by integration with machine learning techniques for what? To which purpose?
Yeah, there are different points of connection with this simulation. For example, a way to integrate machine learning techniques and DPD is to speed up the parameterization of the system. The results are strictly linked to the parameters that you use in the simulation, but sometimes it's very difficult to identify these parameters to capture physical targets. Here, the point is to retain the essential feature to fit physical targets. There are not universal parameters, but parameters need to be defined in a specific way. So in this case, machine learning techniques can help in the parameterization. But at the same time, there are also other applications. You can use machine learning techniques to infer the coarse-grained force field to capture more realistic interaction in the system. Yeah, I think these are the two fields where machine learning techniques help more
Well,
in
it's nice
DPD.
that you mentioned it, direct interactions. So how easy it is and how reliable would it be? I mean, for example, contact models for between rigid particles, or I'm thinking about friction, adhesion, rolling, that are very crucial, and their impact on the rheology is huge. So how easy and how precise would it be for you to take into account these kind of models into DPD?
Yeah, you mean how to account the friction to
Yeah.
reproduce the rheology. I think this is the main issue of coarse graining techniques because, yeah, coarse graining techniques have an issue in dynamics, and you have to describe very well the dissipative term. But at the same time, there is no a well-defined analytic forms derived in a bottom-up way to infer the functional form of the dissipative term. So sometimes the machine learning is used to define this dissipative term, this friction function. Yeah, I will say the way in which the friction depends on other features in the system to describe rheology. So it's a very difficult part.
Right. But it seems it's nice that, I mean,
There
it's
is
funny.
a lot of
This
work to do.
last slide, you put a lot of words that came in my mind too. For example, emulsions, because it seemed clear to me that this would be very proficient, at least to study emulsions, right? But also in
Yeah,
emulsions, you may
right.
have a lot of interplay between the two phases, so some interactions.
Yeah, sure. And more components you have in the system, more parameters you have to fit, and the interaction become very complex, and you need to deal with a lot of parameters. And so your output properties depend on more parameters, and machine learning help very much in this.
Okay. I have a, oh, please, Jose, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello, Nunzia.
Hello.
Many thanks for your presentation. I have just some doubts from the beginning of the presentation. One is regarding that part where you were talking about how to compute the viscosity, and that you talk about like 4 methods. Two of them were non-equilibrium methods, I think.
Yeah.
Lee was. I don't remember the name of the other one. So here in that one in that slide, Here I think you said that with the Least-Edward method, there is a minimum shear rate you can simulate. Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I meant with this that in the case of very low shear rate, you have a problem in DPD because there is the thermal noise that is the thermal noise that doesn't allow you to use a very low shear rates.
So, but it is it a problem in DPD, but not in other numerical
No,
techniques?
because this is the intrinsic stochastic noise of the technique. It's thermal noise that is coming from the construction of the technique. But at the same time, there are also people working on this and addressing this issue and dealing with the other implementation of non-equilibrium method to overcome this issue. But basically, this is a point to pay attention to when you want to simulate shear rates. But this technique has a limitation in the case of self-assembling system, because when you think about a shear thinning system, you have the viscosity that depends on the shear rate that you are applying, but the shear rate at the same time is the forming microstructures. And you want to fix the viscosity of a specific microstructures before starting to change the microstructures. That's why it's important to apply before an equilibrium technique to understand which is the viscosity at zero shear rates, and then you want to see the effect of shear on the system, and the viscosity change because of the realignment of the microstructures. But it's more complicated to use this Least-Edward because you have the shear that affect the microstructures, and you have the dissipative term that depends on the shear, and it's more complicated.
Okay. The other question was about the previous slide with the other method. I didn't understand how do you impose that boundary condition, because in Least-Edwards, I think that
I can
goes
repeat.
out, you will move laterally when the
I
particle
can
go
repeat.
into again.
Okay, I can repeat. Basically, the Muller-Plathe approach acts in a reverse way with respect to the Least-Edward. In the Least-Edward, we are imposing a velocity gradient in the system, and then we are computing the viscosity by measuring the stress. In this case, it's the opposite. We are imposing a steady-state shear flow by imposing a momentum flux. And how we are imposing this momentum flux? The system is divided into a limit number of layers in the Z directions called beans. And from the top layer is selected the bead with the largest momentum in the X direction, and as well as from the middle layer is selected the beads with the smallest momentum in the X direction. And then the momenta of both beads are swapped. In this way, you are generating an artificial momentum flux in the opposite direction. And then the momentum flux is computed by the total momentum transferred over the time interval. So you have the momentum flux imposed in the system, so it's known. And then you can compute the viscosity by measuring the velocity gradient in the system using this relationship. But in this case, you are supposing that you have this linear velocity profile. So the main limitation of this method is that it's limited to Newtonian fluids. But it's very precise because you can control the intensity of the momentum flux you are imposing, and you can check that the intensity is correct, verifying that the velocity profile is linear, and the velocity profile is a property that quickly converge. Okay.
Okay.
I hope it's clear. Okay.
And my last question is, I don't remember the slide, but there were like two videos of the pluronic, one forming the micelles, small micelles, and the other one, I think it was like a phase separation. That one, yeah.
Yes, yeah,
Here, the initial state is
it's
it?
random. It's
Yeah,
random.
but are they different between L6?
The concentration.
The concentration of
The
of
polymer
the.
concentration. The polymer concentration.
But I see that on the left they are like needles, on the right they are like bubbles.
Yeah, allora, yeah, on the left, we want to see the formation of micellar phase because we know that this concentration of polymer, 5% of polymer concentration, we expect to see from the phase diagram the formation of micellar phase. And we can see from the simulation effectively the formation of the micellar phase. But then
what I don't understand is why on the left they are straight lines and on the right side they don't look like straight lines.
I think it's just a visual effect because in the first case we are putting less chains of polymer and you are able to see the straight line that are basically the polymer chains. In the other case is the same, but you are not able to see because there are more chains in the system. It's just a visualization.
Okay.
But basically you can put chains in a random way in the system because the thermodynamic equilibrium, so the final point of your simulation, does not depend on the initial state. And this is a property of this technique and should be in this way. So random state, different initial state, but the same final state. And the final state should be the phase that you can see from the phase diagram because this is the equilibrium state.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I do have two very quick last questions, if you don't mind. With the I forgot the name, the Mueller-Plathe approach, I think it's called. You just said that it's limited to Newtonian fluids, right?
Yeah, typically is written this way. Yeah.
Why? I mean, what if you apply I mean, it's from what I understood, is an approach to fix momentum flux, right?
Yeah, you are imposing the momentum flux, but at the same time you are supposing this velocity profile.
Or you are supposed. Okay. Okay, okay.
I don't know if there are some generalization complication of the technique because I understand your point in principle, but for this implementation, you are supposing this velocity profile as output.
Yes, okay. And one last it's mainly a curiosity. So it's simulation. So how fast are they? Let's suppose if you like, I don't know, choose one of the systems you simulated, and like how heavy are the simulations? How many cores do you need to use? Is it
maybe this? So you are meaning the level of course graining?
No, I'm really talking like how many CPU hours, is it parallelized, or really this is a geek question.
Yeah, okay. I think it depends on the system basically.
Sure.
But for the prediction of equilibrium properties at this point, there are very recent implementation of the method running on GPU. So for the prediction of equilibrium properties, I usually use the GPU and code is parallelized and is very fast running on GPU. Otherwise, for the prediction of transport properties with this extended method, the implementation is not so updated. So yeah, you can use CPU. And if I want to give you a number using the GPU for the prediction of equilibrium properties, yeah, our simulation of 24 hours, for example.
Okay.
But if you are using a CPU for the prediction of transport properties with the equilibrium method, because you want to see the statistics of the stress autocorrelation function, you can take several days. It really depends on what is your output, because if you need a very long statistics, you of course can parallelize, but you need a very long simulation. So I would say at least 3 days
Okay, thank you very much.
for current implementation of the code, because yeah, GPU is the future for the simulation, I think.
Yeah. Okay, are there any other questions? I don't think that anybody wrote in chat. No, I don't see anything. Okay. Well, if there are no more questions, I'm gonna thank Nancy again, and I'm gonna stop here.
My pleasure.
Gonna stop here the recording.